resources of their own. And the other reason for this activity was the sense that there's a real need for a deeper discussion about increasing the impact of individual training on institutional strengthening. And this is the lens through which we've looked at all of our webinar topics. We're taking USAID's Human and Institutional Capacity Development Framework, called HICD, which is currently the agency's mandated policy, and we've been using that framework as the framework for each of our webinar topics. So in the first 3 webinars, we didn't actually spend a great deal of time talking about what HICD is and what the framework looks like, because we understood that many of you had some sense of familiarity with it. But we've realized over time, and given the questions that people have asked both during and after the webinars, that it is still a relatively new concept for many of us. So we're starting off this webinar with a bit of a deeper look at the concept. And then we'll turn our attention to the specific topic of the day, which is what are best practices for leveraging the impact of individual training on institutional capacity strengthening. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to my co-moderator, Andrew Gilboy, who's been working with APLU on this project from the very first webinar back in June. Andy is a specialist in performance improvement, organizational development, human resources, and HICD methods, with over 40 years of professional experience in international development.
Thank you, Anne, Claire. Let's take a quick look at the agenda. So you see we've completed our welcome from Anne Claire. We'd like to do a very short introduction to institutional strengthening. After that, we'd like to divide the questions and contributions from you all into 3 categories. What are you doing to impact institutions before training begins, during training, and after training? This is an attempt by all of us to bring forward some of the actual activities, ideas, some of which we might call best practices, that can help us increase the impact we're having on institutions, even if we're focusing on training individuals. So obviously we know we train individuals, not bricks and mortar. So the point of this is to help us make a transition to focusing increasingly on institutional impact. That's the purpose actually of all 4 of the webinars we've done. And hopefully the foundation upon which we can continue this work in a community of practice, or just a way that we can keep this discussion going. So let's take a look at what institutional strengthening is, if in fact that's what our underlying objective is, to strengthen institutions. We thought it would be useful to take a very short time, 5 minutes, to look at a topic that people spend, of course, their lives working on. So Paola, can you go to the next slide? Okay. If our purpose is to find a way to increase the impact on institutions, then what does that mean? What is institutional strengthening? I prefer a very simple definition of all of this. These are some of the names people give it, but for me it's simply performance improvement. How can you improve the performance of an institution? And we use the word organization or institution. People spend their lives defining these and the differences or the similarities, but for me, an organization can range from an informal, unregistered women's vegetable growing association with no office, no chairs, no reception, all the way to a formal government ministry with HR structures and everything. Each of these has similar, if not identical, functional areas, and performance can be achieved in working with these 2 types of organizations, or the range of them, in many different ways. Notice that training is not the only way to improve performance. That's one of the underlying mantras of performance, of institutional strengthening. We don't know what it may take to strengthen an organization, which is why we do what's called performance gap analysis. So how do you actually improve performance in an institution? Many people actually ask us this question, which we find very interesting because it shows that we're still primarily focused on improving an individual's capacity. I wouldn't say in a vacuum, but we've made a lot of progress in making sure that individuals are doing research and studying topics that are of great need in their countries or in their institutions. So on that score, we've probably made a lot of very important improvements from the old days of what we call best and brightest training, where we just selected students who were smart. Nowadays, everyone is looking at the topics of the study, the fields of study. We're going way beyond it. The point of this webinar and all four of them is to find ways we can even go further and really begin to impact institutions with what some people call intentionality. So institutional performance can be improved by following basically some very old methods that have been time tested for a long time. The International Society for Performance Improvement, ISPI, is the leader in the field of developing models to be used primarily in North America, but in recent years they've expanded to global interest, because what we find is institutions change, everywhere in the world following the same method. Now, USAID has adopted what they call the HICD framework from the ISPI models and tweaked them a bit to fit the international environment in which we all work. So basically, it's very simple. The common elements are you take a snapshot of the present situation in an organization. Then you figure out what that organization should be doing in the future, and often that's based on a strategic vision or strategic plan that they have. Then you look at the gap, why are they not achieving that? And then you analyze some root causes. So this analysis leads to a group of solutions that you can propose, some of which will not involve training. Sometimes it's reconfiguring the floor plan in an organization so people communicate better. I am now going to take a sip of water. Hold on. Okay, so let's take a look at what this looks like graphically very quickly. All of these you can come back and get copies of from our website. And this is just another way of looking at exactly what I've been telling, what I've been explaining. This is from the USAID project in Liberia called GEMS, Governance and Economic Management Support Project, which is intended to improve the performance in government ministries in Liberia in a post-conflict situation. So again, you see the gaps, you measure the gaps, figure out where the organization wants to be in the future. You design, you analyze the root causes, which is one of the most important, shall I say, exercises to do in an institution. Then you come up with solutions. Now there's one big element here that's missing, which I will get back to in a minute. A very important element that we can help our students and trainees improve on, so when they return, institutions can actually improve. But I'll get back to that. So what might some of our trainees actually face when they return? Now, a lot of you know all of this. I'm not going to run through these, but just look at number 2. That's probably my favorite. Jealousy from peers who weren't selected for the training. I would venture that some of the trainees in training in the States or wherever they are in the world do not or have not focused on the uncomfortable environment that may await them when they return. The jealousy issue is big, so we can help our trainees in facing that and knowing how to deal with an with a challenging situation where people suspect their motives or are very jealous that they did not get selected for the training grant. So that's just one example. We can help our students and our trainees and equip them with tools to understand the environment they're going back in. Another one I'll quickly look at is the classic teaching style, second from the bottom, with students used to the old ways of learning. You would be amazed that some students, when they learn about the new teaching styles, like the students may learn during their training overseas, are not actually so quickly accepted by the students. Even though it's more fun, it's more interactive, sometimes students want to go back to their old teaching ways, their learning ways, because that's what they know how to do. So all of these things we can help our students prepare for. Now, the next slide I'm not going to spend any time on. You can go back and read these specifics, but basically we're making a transition from training to institutional strengthening. This gives you some ideas of the differences between the two. Please refer to this later. It's a useful, not comprehensive, but a useful illustration of the differences between training individuals and training individuals with the intent of helping change institutions. And that pretty much summarizes what this webinar series is about and what we're trying to influence all of you into achieving. So let's take a look at our challenge. So in addition to helping develop their technical expertise, meaning of our students and trainees, we can also provide support to the trainees before, during, and after training. Now that's what we're going to talk about today. We can give them tools, leadership skills, soft skills, coaches, and some of these topics we've actually covered in the webinar series. So our challenge is to find ways to equip the students with tools, attitudes, approaches that will help them cope and succeed in the environment to which they're returning. Now, what was that one item I mentioned that was forgotten in the graphic about how to improve institutional performance? It's change management. And if we don't have a handle on helping institutions manage the change strategy, then there will be tremendous resistance to change. There will always be resistance even if we have a strategy, but there'll be much more and much less likelihood of success. So this chart, this is one of my favorite graphs. It's the left road or the right road. Which road do people choose? Compliance or commitment? On the left is what is widely used in change, in inducing institutions to change, which is, change or get out. I mean, what's the big problem? The change will help everybody. So there's directives and hierarchical approaches to insisting that people change. And we know from a lot of documentation that it doesn't work. It could work over the short term, but overall, people and institutions do not change in an enforcement mentality, enforcement environment. This is well documented. So the other one is commitment, where you actually begin to mitigate the change resistance that people will meet. It may seem obvious to our trainees when they go back. Of course, why wouldn't a teacher want to change their teaching style and be more interactive and involve students more and get off the podium in front of the students? Why wouldn't? Well, there are many reasons that a faculty member would not want to accept that. And then in an African environment, or actually many other environments, people will nod yes, but resist in a very quiet way. So all of these factors are very important and will be challenges to our trainees when they return. This is kind of the background to why we wanted to talk about this briefly. It gives a bit of a reason, a bit of a raison d'etre to what we actually are trying to equip our students to face and to be successful in. We've trained them beautifully. This is what we do so well. Focus on the individual learning, focus on critical thinking. All of these have been documented as great successes in U.S. training programs and training programs in other parts of the world as well. But if they go back home and are met with these challenges, they have no tools, no leadership skills developed, no soft skills developed that they can share, then they will be very frustrated. And the institutions will not achieve their objectives, and our overall objectives will be compromised. So with that as an introduction, let's move now. We want to hear from you all on what you're doing or what you would like to do or what you think would work in helping the trainees before training begins, during training, and after training. So at this point, I'll ask Anne-Claire to kind of moderate, but get your pointers ready. Find the place on your screen where you can raise your hand, call in, speak up, send in, if you don't want to speak up, send in your suggestions and your ideas of what can work before training, and we will moderate this in the richest, most interactive way that we can. Okay, Anne-Claire?
Thanks so much, Andy. I do want to say that if anybody has technical difficulties at any point, you can't find the hand button on your screen, we have someone who can help you. His information is at the bottom of the screen right now. It's Mark Varner, and you can contact him by phone or email or through the question box. But hopefully, I know on different devices the hand button is on different spots in the screen, but we're hoping that you all can each find it. So we're going to try to break up this discussion in this format of thinking about what should we do before training begins, during training, and after training. And we may discover as we're talking that it's hard to delineate that perfectly neatly. But I think the overarching point to having it structured in this way is that strengthening institutional impact after training is over doesn't mean that you start thinking about it after training is over. You really are starting from project design from the very first steps. So let's start with that first topic, before training begins, what can we be doing to strengthen institutional impact? And we've got some hands up, so I'm going to start with Karenduga. I see your hand is up. I'm unmuting you now.
Yeah, I'm muted. Am I still muted?
No, you're ready to go. I can hear you.
Okay, you can now. Okay. So on the before training begins, one of the things that we found in my organization, which was the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Kumasi, Ghana, before training begins, we would draw a very clear picture of what we wanted the trainee to look like. We particularly did this even for our own training. For example, we defined what we wanted the biochemistry grad going out into the job market after studying with us to look like, along several parameters. Not just what technical skills the person had, but we wanted a lot of soft skills valued in the workplace. We wanted high integrity, and we wanted a service orientation, which were in keeping also with the mission of the university. So an important before training event is to really commit and decide what you want that trainee to have in addition to his technical training, and understand why you want that. Know what it links to. And in our case, for the undergrads, it was getting them jobs where they could add value and be employed in a competitive pool.
Thank you, Karen. This is Andy. That's very interesting. I think I sense that over the years, selection of participants has not involve that kind of profile. And I'm very happy to hear you to make that point. If many of the listeners may not even be involved in selection of the trainees, and you know, USAID people listening in, or some of the implementing agencies that are given the trainees, but even then, I think the whole point is, what is the profile? What is the kind of person you're helping build through training? And it's not just what are the technical capabilities you're trying to equip that person with. And I think that's one of the real good points. And the fact that we're doing this at an early stage. And it could actually, I know in the Borlaug leadership activity, one of the criteria is leadership potential. It's not just technical. And that's another way of including those aspects in the selection. Okay. And Claire, are there other? Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks, Andy.
You're welcome.
We have lots of hands that have gone up, and I'm going to try and go in order that they went up. So Florence, we'll start with you, and then Samantha, and Helga. And Hiram, I see you sent in a comment. We'll come to that afterwards. So Florence, I'm unmuting you now.
Okay. Thank you, Anne Claire. I'm Florence Dunkel, Montana State University, and most of our training was, of course, in sub-Saharan Africa, both in Rwanda and Niger. Rwanda and Mali, sorry. One thing, the previous speaker, and I should need to remember her name. What was that?
Oh, Karen Duga.
Karen, yes, mentioned. And I wanted to underscore that. And we have learned the hard way that we need to include something called the holistic process, which means working with the institution or the individual, both, so they both understand the process of what the desired, first of all, what the desired quality of life is for the institution or the individual. You can do it at both levels.
Sorry, did you say quality of life?
Yes, quality of life, what they want to be, as in what they like, what.
Oh, Florence, you're cutting in and out. So I'm sorry, we'll come back to you because I still can't hear you, and I think I said Samantha was next, so I'm unmuting you now, Samantha, and we will come back to you, Florence. Oh, sorry, I'm having trouble unmuting you. Paula, can you help me unmute Samantha?
Well, we're waiting. Let me just make a comment again. I think Florence's point is to take the to kind of look at the, I hate to say product, but the kind of person we're dealing with, not just the technical aspect, but her term holistic process is a nice phrase, nice way of looking at the process we're engaging the student in, not just the technical training. And Claire?
So Dave Crable, was that your voice, and are you unmuted?
Yes.
Okay.
I am with Samantha Alvis, who will be speaking later. But Samantha and I have joined together. We are with the Innovative Agricultural Research Initiative, a Feed the Future project in Tanzania, and I'm the chief of party. What I wanted to share is when we were recruiting trainees for iAgri, we did a lot of interviews. We interviewed about 2 people for every one that we selected because the only hard information that we had was grade point average, and we wanted more than that. And it was an opportunity for us to assess how much the candidates knew about the agriculture, the food system in Tanzania. And it was really an eye-opener because most of them were actually employees at Sokoto University or at the Ministry of Agriculture. And even though some of them had had 1 or several years of experience, we discovered that they actually knew relatively little about the sector. So in our interviews, we would ask them to tell us about major trends in the sector, and then we would ask several other questions. And when the trainees have returned then to Tanzania, one of the things that they reported was that those series of questions when we interviewed were really an eye-opener for them. And what we've done now is even before they go, we try to inspire them with a vision of becoming leaders in the food system of Tanzania. It doesn't mean they have to become the minister, but to become leaders. And an important part of that is informing oneself about the food system, about what its trends are, what its problems are beyond one's own discipline. So this is, I mean, this is still a work in progress, but this is something that we're trying to do before they begin their training, so that when they're in their training and they're in their graduate coursework, they're continuing to read the newspapers from back home. They're reading widely in a wide range of literature, so that they can grasp the understanding of the sector and truly play a leadership role, when they come back.
Thanks, Dave. We have so many questions and people to get to that I want to ask you a question, but maybe just for thought, and we'll move on. But so with the focus on institutional strengthening and your questions in the interviews that focus on what does the sector need, was that because you understood that the institution needed a better understanding as a whole of what the sector needed? What I'm getting at is the sector is broad, and the institution is the institution that'll be there to build human capacity in the future to address these broader challenges. And so was your question about the sectors coming from an institutional analysis that identified that as a major performance improvement issue for Sokoine? But again, I'm just throwing that out there, but we do need to leave some time for others to come in. Maybe we can come back to that. I had said that Hiram, I would read your question next. Hiram has written that the focus of the series has been, I believe, on optimizing the beneficial impacts that U.S.-based training has on international ag students, scientists, and institutions. This is really helpful. We in USDA would also be interested in discussions about how such programs can maximize mutual benefit so that U.S. campus programs are appropriately globalized. Well, we're happy to hear that. Thank you, Hiram. I also want to read this question here from Bojan Dakal, who asks, can't we develop the leadership within each individual to motivate them and to develop the enthusiasm within subject matter for any teaching class? I think some individuals are also unaware of the benefit of leadership. But how can we develop the feeling of leadership to each individual?
That's a very interesting point that you've made, Bojan. I think, again, the concept of leadership is tossed around by many, many implementers. I've heard people say with pride, yeah, we did a workshop on leadership. It was really good. It helped the students. Well, we wonder whether the workshop can have the lasting effect. Can we not think of leadership as beginning the process of integrating leadership in everything? Can we not think of that in the before training period? And not just in selection, but in actually implementing. And Bojan is suggesting that we actually include it in classroom thinking and in building enthusiasm in the students, and that they actually may be quite unaware of leadership. People are unaware that leadership can be learned. Many people still think you're born a leader, or but you can't learn it. So these notions can be addressed more than just in a workshop, but somehow integrated in perhaps an action plan or something that the students could develop. I think we should do maybe one more question on the before training aspect. There's so much more that can be said in the designing of the projects. Imagine USAID actually designing, or other foundations designing, these participant training long-term degree projects. They too need to be aware of how much of the implementation can begin early on that can ensure that an institutional focus is reached through the training of the individual. And Claire, do you have another one?
Yeah, I'm going to read a quick comment from Sandra Boyers, and then Helga, I will unmute you after that. So Sandra has written that it's also important to get target individuals involved in root cause analysis, which helps inform goals in a collaborative way. That's an excellent
Oh, I really like that. Of
Yeah.
course, it goes back to the the introduction I gave on what a root cause analysis is.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic idea. Imagine if you asked your potential trainees or your selected students before they leave, hey, let's do a root cause analysis just in your department with the leadership in the department. Now, that's a great idea.
That's
I mean,
excellent.
it would take a little bit of effort, but not really any cost. You know, it's not really a cost thing. It's to help the students realize that they're going off with a knowledge of what needs to be changed in their faculty, their department, and then during their training, they're going to be looking for solutions. Thank you. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay, Helga, you're unmuted now.
Thank you, I'm clear, but I'm not sure you can hear me very well. My internet is not
Oh,
very
you're
good
crystal
here.
clear for me. Although maybe there's a delay, but I could hear you just fine.
Okay. I was going to say that in a word, it's already a very competitive process to get an award fellowship, which then offers a series of training courses to fellows who, again, have to compete for technical training, and some of that is in the United States. And in these applications, our fellows have to tell us not only what skills they need, but also how this specific skill training that they would receive in the U.S. or elsewhere would contribute to improving their research work and that of their home institution. And in addition to that, how it would impact on the farming communities, and particularly rural women, smallholder farmers. We do require, before training starts, a comprehensive work plan that has to be also supported by a letter of the fellow's director or supervisor at her home institution, so that the assurance that this will benefit the institution does not only come from the fellow, but also from her home institution. And that has definitely helped us get feedback from the institutions that indeed these technical trainings have been not only beneficial to the individuals, but to the teams that the individual works in and to the institution in general. Sometimes to the effect that collaborative research projects have evolved between the host and the home institutions, and mostly under the leadership of that trained individual, but also under others.
Thank you very much, Helga. That very interesting, tossing around these ideas that can be done, you know, early on before training begins, or in the early stages of training. I wanted to read something. Another interesting idea. You know, I never thought of this one. Clara Cohen came in with a, why not involve students before they leave for training to be involved in strategic planning in the institution or in the faculty. Actually have strategic planning sessions. I'll add this to this, knowing that the students will be going abroad. That would be really interesting, and that they're charged with actually helping reach the vision or mission that has been expressed in the strategic plan. That's cool. That would be equipping the students with responsibility for change. It's part of the change management strategy. You wouldn't even have to call it that, but it would be effectively doing that. That's a great idea, Clara. Thanks. And Claire, I think you had one more. Then we want to move to during training.
Yes, Ron, we'd like to hear from you before we move on. Hopefully we're not shortchanging the later aspects, but please go ahead, Ron. You're unmuted. Ron, can you hear us?
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
This is Ron Raffing on USAID. Am I on? I bring out this sort of structural. Hello? Yeah, I'm on. I think we should highlight the steps needed in the pre-training period to bring the institution in to look at itself self-critically and in this root cause analysis process, so that that is done properly. I think we keep on slipping back towards the training component of all this process, but we have to spend more time thinking about what it is that we do with the institution to identify and face the other factors that have to be reformed or changed in order for training to be effective when the training gets back. And it's a very good idea that the individual selected for training be part of this process for self-examination on the part of the institution. But that's the trickiest part, it seems to me.
Well, Ron, thank you very much for that idea. Yes, and I think thanks for that. Again, we're in the before training process where we're trying to involve institutions. Some of the implementers out there listening are, I'm sure, thinking or scribbling on their little notepads or something. Well, we don't have any contact with the institutions, and so we know this. And to the extent that USAID people are listening that are planning and designing programs, this can be taken into consideration. But even then, the trainees can still, when they're selected, the implementing agency in the states or wherever can ask them to get involved and somehow find linkages where those students can begin the process of the root cause analysis in a very light way, obviously. But they should see themselves and see their purpose as channels.
It's breaking up.
Me too. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Keep talking because I can't.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I won't repeat what I said, but you can hear it on the recording. But the idea that students become channels of change. I wouldn't say champions yet. That's jargon, but they haven't yet become champions because they haven't gone back loaded with all the things they want to accomplish. But they're becoming channels for the institution to improve using, the unlikely source of a student who's going off to get a master's or PhD. They see their role as way beyond just the training aspect. That's the point, and I think that's a good point that Ron has made. Now, we should move on because we've taken up our 20 minutes. So let's move to the during training part. And Claire?
Sure. I just do want to say one summarizing point, which I think many of the comments that have just been made are really part of action planning. Having the individuals being trained think about, so they do a root cause analysis of what are the problems in their institution, where those are coming from, and what action they will take during their training and after their training to try and address some of these. And that action plan then can be used throughout their training for them to monitor their own progress and monitor their own achievements, which also helps all of us tell better stories about the work that we're doing. And it really helps focus the individual. So, go ahead.
Good point. And Claire, that's a great segue because action planning is done during training as well as before, but it's refined. It's not a document that sits on a shelf. So it's a living document, and it's a living way for the trainees to constantly rethink what they're doing and seek out opportunities that they know, opportunities to learn something that they know will help them change their institution when they return. And this kind of curiosity that you could plant in the students in their action plans. Now, action planning has been discussed, but it's really something that, like mentoring, takes a structure, takes an intentionality on the part of implementing agencies to actually do, and it takes time, and it takes care.
Yeah.
People implementing agencies are very busy, but they have to find time to talk to the students, ask them how they're doing on their action plans, and actually make them accountable to reaching their results, the short-term results while they're here in training.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on. What are your ideas for the second section? We've got some good ones that came up in the first one. So during training, what can you do to increase the impact on institutions during an individual's training?
Now, Florence, I know that you were originally wanting to answer that first question. We're going to try you again because your hand is still up and see if you are able to speak, and also hopefully comment a little bit on this during training period. So you are now unmuted.
Okay. Are you hearing okay now?
I can hear you, yep.
Okay. Yes, I think that looking back, one of the impactful things that the trainees did at our institutions, and this was involving 6 other institutions in the United States, not just Montana State, was that they became mentors in the classroom, and they now serve, they still serve now, how many, 5, 6 years later as site mentors. And so they have become agents of change for our own, certainly MSU. And I would like to know at the other institutions how that has worked. But yes, and it's still part of this, using this holistic process where you look at the quality of life of the community you're working together to change, what resources the community perceives they have, and then what forms of production of those resources the community thinks they have or are using to produce those resources. So it's now a network, and yeah, so raising
so you've
yes.
Oh, sorry. You've touched on 2 points. So one, mentoring, which for those of you who were not able to participate in our 3rd webinar, we had a very interesting discussion on how powerful that can be. And you've just talked about that with the fact that 6 years later, there is still this mentoring relationship that you helped establish. And then networking. It'd be interesting to hear other people's ideas about what strategies have worked to create networks among the cohorts or helping individuals network within their fields that then is used to the advantage of their institution.
So I think we're talking about during training. Florence has given an interesting idea of the continuing mentoring that's going on, not just a one-time shot, but they actually, and I also think community service and kind of outreach in the United States or in wherever they are in training to begin to get used to application of some of their overall learnings when they return to their institutions. So the action planning can include things like a commitment by the trainee to share what they've learned during training with their colleagues and their peers. It's very critical that they be charged with that responsibility. They do not just return to their country and their institution and they do, without doing things, taking actions that can help their peers. Also, imagine going back to a country and the first thing they may meet is jealousy and disinterest from their peers while they're bringing back all kinds of information that they're sharing with them. So they have a plan to share that's part of their action plan during their training abroad, and they can actually consciously collect information knowing that that will help them when they return. So I mean, during training is a critical period. Are there comments? Great. I didn't hear. Yeah,
Okay, I agree has their hand up, and I think you're unmuted now. Please go ahead, Dave or Samantha.
Hi, this time it's Samantha, and I'm relatively new on the iAgri team, but one of the first projects that I'm working on is looking at developing some leadership training for our iAgri cohorts of students, and going off of Florence's point on networking. What we're looking at for this series of webinars is finding an opportunity to have these cohorts network amongst themselves, because we're in a unique situation that we know all of our students within our program are Tanzanian, that they will be returning to Sokolini or one of the ministries. So it's a built-in network, and if we look at Cotter's model of change, and one of the guiding principles is being able to build coalitions, that if we can start them networking within their cohort and the other cohorts, that they can already start to be building those coalitions or those networks for when they return. So we're looking at possibly doing this through maybe more professional social networking, like a Google community or a LinkedIn group, where they can facilitate discussion in a more professional manner than, say, Facebook or some other type of social network.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Thank you, Samantha. Can everyone hear me? I hope. Yes, good. We're having a little technical challenge, but that's part of the whole process of doing these webinars. Interesting point. Again, the Tanzania project is I wouldn't say unique. It certainly is different than many, because they have a cohort of 125 Tanzanians spread out in different institutions undergoing training. So that presents great opportunities for networking, just tremendous. And they are taking advantage of those. Other programs may, because they have different nationalities, different people from different places, different institutions, they may not even know the institutions. So the challenge there is to, again, with intentionality, build networks, help the students build networks among them across country, across even subsectors of fields of study, so that you begin to build the kind of a learning environment outside of the classroom. And I think that's one of the key issues here, or key ideas that we're trying to develop. So are there other comments coming in? If you don't know how to raise your hand, just think back in primary school and click that icon on your screen. We want to hear from you. Or send in your question if you're a little bit shy to put it in. Someone said, no, Andy, we can't hear you. Can you all hear me now, I hope?
I can hear you. If other people are having difficulty hearing, please write in the question box, but we'll keep going, assuming that you can. But Stacy's added a comment. In years past, USAID's Education Office trained teams of individuals so they could return to their home country and have a support person in their office who they can work with to apply new learning together. This also avoids the disinterest from the home office, as Andy just mentioned. I imagine many programs today might not have that support person in an office in country. Now, there are probably ways to try and establish that with the institution. One of the ideas that Andy and I had been thinking about as we were brainstorming for this webinar was trying to understand what are the ways to support students while they're away. And that includes, I think, as someone was just mentioning, there's virtual ways to connect the students, but also there has to be this kind of regular checking in, as Andy was talking about earlier.
And Claire, great. We have one question from Rufaro in, I think, Nairobi. And then let's move on to the after training, which poses some interesting challenges, because people always think, well, it's after training, so we have nothing to do with them anymore. So let's, after Rufaro's comment, let's transition into the last part, which is after training ideas for increasing impact on institutions. Rufaro, can we, I think we're unmuting you. Are you there? You are not there. Okay, so.
Sorry, she hadn't been unmuted yet.
There. Rufaro, can we hear you now?
Yeah, you can hear me? Okay.
Yes, I hear you. Great.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Okay. What
Speak
we do?
loudly and clearly.
Okay. I'm going to combine before and during training. What we do is we actually work with the identified students to help identify a local in-country supervisor who will work with them and help them and guide them in selecting a thesis topic that addresses a problem that is critical in their home countries. And during training, our PhD students actually go back to their home countries and do most of the research in their home countries, working with that in-country supervisor and the university supervisors. So they are kept in touch with the home situation and they are mentored, helped along in the project, so that keeps them very real and addressing relevant issues in their home countries.
Very good. Thank you, Rufaro. That's, again, it's linking the students to the institutions so that they can be looking for opportunities to be effective change agents, basically, and help change things. I would emphasize that we're talking, of course, they often do this in the technical mode of relations with their home country advisor or professors, but we're talking beyond that. We're trying to get beyond just the technical enhancements from closer connections with the institutions. We're trying to get to the actual change that is needed. And I think of course, they're mixed in very often, as you pointed out, so it's very helpful. Let's move into after training. Sometimes this is the most challenging, maybe, I should say, or some people say surprising. Why are we talking about it? When the trainees left, I mean, what more is there to do? Well, there's a lot to do, and there's a lot that we can, I think, help them actually come up, to figure out what to do when they return. So let's take a look at what people have to say. What can you do after the training has finished to support the student in making changes and helping change and have an impact on the institutions? Let's think of it in terms of projects that do continue and can continue to have relationship, as well as those where the funding has ended, the project is closed down, and what do we do? So what are some of your ideas on what we can do after training?
Andy, I'm sad to say I think that people are really having a hard time hearing us. So that sorry everybody, we're going to just troubleshoot for a second. We do see a hand has just gone up and gone down again. Oh, now we're hearing. Okay, so we will keep troubleshooting and try and keep the conversation going at the same time. Jennifer, I saw your hand go up and back down. I don't know if you want to speak. I guess if you do, please put your hand back up. Oh, okay, so can folks all chime in at this very moment through the question box and tell us whether you can hear us or not? Okay, so I think it's possibly resolved. And we have a comment, although it's back into during the training period, but let me go ahead anyway. So this is from Karenduga. With some of AID's programs, there's a significant component of research in country, and involving those who were left behind reduces jealousy and gets everyone on board for the needed changes even before the trainees return. I think that is an excellent point. Some of the ways to involve students, actually, to involve those who were quote-unquote left behind, involve some planning before the student departs. So there could be an assessment of what are some of the barriers to accessing information that colleagues are facing, and so that the trainee, when they're in another place with better access to information, can be looking for information and resources for their colleagues while they're away. And then just having an understanding of those information needs and interests of colleagues, the trainee can be sending reports and identifying relevant webinars and other things that those left behind can access online, and bringing back reports with them are all very helpful. We've also heard the idea of hosting brown bag lunches when the students return, when the trainees return, and helping to spread the wealth in that way. Now, the brown bag lunch, the fact that it's a little bit informal, is a less threatening way to come back and share what one has learned. And also, I think just introducing the brown bag lunch concept and having the trainee initiate a brown bag lunch series where their colleagues also speak, it might establish a new way of communicating in the institution that could be useful going forward.
Thanks, Anne-Claire. I think we've resolved the audio problems, I think. We're getting a lot of messages that you can hear us fine. Unfortunately, you didn't hear my brilliant comments earlier, so I encourage all of you to go to the website and listen to the full version of the unforgettable comments that I made. So anyway, we're talking about the after training, and it's challenging because you may have lost direct contact with the trainee, but there are some ways that we can encourage them, and even if we've lost contact, if we've armed the students with the correct tools and ideas, they can do these things. They can organize brown bag lunches. They can do a lot of activities if we've sufficiently helped them during the training. So obviously the during training aspect is key to having an impact after training. Another thing that people have actually mentioned is monitoring. You know, if an implementing agency is involved in a country in many ways, and many of them are in various activities, they're going out to the field to work with colleagues in country X. Why can't they take some time to actually get the group of alumni or of students that have had training in a particular subject area and do a focus group? Kind of check in with those students 6 months, a year later. What are they doing? What was the impact of their training? What are they doing in the technical area as well? It's not difficult to do, but we just have to be reminded to do these things. Alumni associations in a formal, structured way have been talked about for many years at USAID, have been marginally successful, or some people say unsuccessful, because they take a different approach, and it involves often the ambassador, and it becomes more of a formal thing. But there's an awful lot, I think, which is what we're hearing and reading from you all. There's an awful lot that can be done short of that. Anne-Claire?
Stacy Cummings has her hand up. I'm going to unmute you now. I did it.
Hi. In USAID's Education Office, we're really working to better evaluate at Kirkpatrick Level 3, so we're trainees able to apply the new learning on the job. I'd like to leave it at that and see if anyone else is doing something similar.
Oh, music to my ears here. Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation, which I teach and train and use in my life all the time. So if you're not familiar with Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation, Google it. You'll get thousands of hits. Pick one of them and explain, or just send me a request. I'll send you a easy explanation of what it is. It's a wonderful tool to check in with people who've completed training to find out, just as Stacy said, what are they applying? They've learned these things. What are they actually using in the workplace? that they've learned during the training. And that could be a short-term training program or a degree program. What precisely are they using? We've conducted many of these post-training evaluations using that method. It's quite effective. I encourage you all to use it, and it's cheap. You can do it in a discussion, over lunch with somebody without even taking notes in front of them. That's a very useful method. Other ways. And Claire?
We have another comment here from Karen. I won't read the whole thing because there are multiple points to it, and you can all now see it in the comment box. But the first point about a virtual postdoc. So linking up a new PhD returnee with an outside mentor to seek funding together for a first independent research program. And she adds that this should not be the PhD supervisor. I think that we know a lot of programs have grants that are provided at the end of the trainees' training to help them, land on their feet and get started. And I think that a really important element of these grants is to think about how they are benefiting the institution and not just the individual. So it's not just about launching that individual's career, but moving forward the institution. And so I like this idea of linking the grant, well, this is not a grant in this case, seeking funding with a mentor is a great idea, and helping tie trainees with mentors to do that is a fabulous way, I think, to strengthen the impact after training is over.
Thank you, Anne. Claire, that's very good. It occurred to me, we want to pretty much stop on this right now. There's so many other ideas we could talk about, but we want to save time to hear from you on future, what you would like to hear, or what's kind of topics you'd like to address in the future for us to, and we want to explain a bit of that. So I would just say one final word, TOT. Susan Fickling sent an interesting comment in that during the training, we can equip the students with the ability to train. A TOT is not a workshop. A TOT is teaching or training of trainers. It's the training of an individual so that they can effectively convey their ideas to other adults. It is not lecturing. It's an adult training methodology used. If the trainees could become effective communicators, they will have so much less resistance and less pushback when they return. They'll be able to convey their ideas much more effectively, either at a brown bag lunch or through discussions with their faculty supervisors back home. The TOT is really quite critical in changing behavior of a knowledgeable person in front of another knowledgeable person. So I just thought I'd throw that out. Now,
well, I know you said that was going to be the last word on this. I just one other idea that you and I had discussed at some point is, we know that after training is over, we're all busy with what we're engaged with. We're on to the next project in many ways. And one way to get around that problem is setting up an automatic email that will go to the trainee maybe 3 months after they're home, 6 months after they're home, or several automatic emails that are checking in, and you schedule them in your Outlook, and they just go. And in a way, you don't have to rely on your own good memory to remember that you're going to check in with X, Y, and Z person. You set this up at the end of the training period, and it just is a way to keep the communication flowing. And you're thinking at the time about what are this person's issues, what is this person's action plan, what are they intending to do when they go home. And so you can craft that email really following up individually with that person. And 3 or 6 months later, it automatically goes back, and the trainee responds, and hopefully creates a dialogue that can continue. So that was the last point I wanted to make.
Great idea. We're negotiating here for time. Great idea, actually. And it reminds me of what students have often told me in the many interviews I've done. Well, do you have any contact with your implementing agency? Oh, yeah, they send fundraising letters every 2 months. Well, that's not what we're talking about. an email or an automatic, which is a neat idea because with technology, to set up an automatic email going out every once in a while, soliciting information back from the students, letting them know that someone cares about how they're applying what they've learned back home and the impact it could have. So these are some good ideas. There's so many more ideas. We will actually produce these in a report that will be shared with all of you who've signed up for even one webinar. We'll be doing that. It won't be a 200-page bound report by any means. It'll be a very succinct capsule of what the main best practices are that we've discussed and what some other topics that we think should be best practices. So let's move quickly on. What we've done now for last hour is we've talked about institutional strengthening. We've talked about ways to strengthen institutions before, during, and after. Now, we have maybe 3 or 4 minutes to hear what you heard today that you think you might be able to put into action. Then we want to hear from you what you want to hear in the future. So first question, what did you hear today that you might put into action right away? And we give you right away to answer.
What I wanted to add to that is for the sake of time, if you could write your answer in the comment box, so that way everyone can talk at once. And we're also
that's a good idea.
Yeah. Now, feel free to raise your hand to make a comment, but we're interested in seeing your written comments, and we'll capture that in the summary at the end. What really resonated, and what do you think you might be able to implement soon? Now, I will also call on Tag Dammit, who has his hand up, who's also commented that he's lost us. So let's give this a try. Tag, I've just unmuted you. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. We're very sorry.
I was going to respond to something. Yeah, I was going to respond to that last bit about the people returning back and the environment they operate in. One of the things that we found from the work with the CRISP model has been that when the CRISPs had a long-term relationship in terms of solving a development problem over a period of, say, 10 years, what would happen is that there was a focus on a research area. People were trained as one component within one component of that research area, and when they went back, they continued to function within the overall CRISP program. So that having the ability to have a long-term relationship with support really makes a much better long-term support structure for the trainee, and also means that the people who are in country, who are not in the chosen, are still functioning within the overall research project, so everyone benefits. And that, to me, is a very strong model for supporting people and making connections. And some of those kinds of connections have been maintained for well over a decade.
Wow, thanks, Tag. I said wow for 2 things. It was a very good idea that Tag put into us, and we just listen to the webinar when it's posted online in a couple of days.
Muted.
But look at these suggestions flowing in. I feel like a fundraising campaign. Yes, we've got all the contributions are flowing in. Lots of people are sending in their written suggestions of what they intend to use from today's webinar. Thank you. This is excellent, and it gives us a good kind of instant feedback of what might be useful, and we will be sharing all of this with everybody. Now, let's take a look at the next slide, and if I can see it here, where is it? Yes, this is what we've done for the last 4 webinars, beginning in June. Monitoring your training program's results, That was the first one to kind of give you an idea of what you can do to actually find out if you're having an impact. And at that point, we introduced the whole notion of institutional impact, but we hadn't really, shall I say, emphasized it to the extent that we knew we would be later on. So then the second one was based on how can we resolve this very difficult, challenging situation, especially in agriculture, but very much in other fields too, engineering, other fields. How can we attract and retain women for long-term training? That was a very vibrant session with some great ideas. Invite all of you to look at the summary of that, of each one actually. The third one, tools and resources on mentoring. Mentoring is such a misunderstood or under-understood area. I learned an awful lot in how to structure and conduct mentoring so that it really can have an impact. Yes, it has an important impact on the individual, but yes, the individual also can begin to mentor others, like Florence mentioned was happening with her trainees. And then today, how to leverage institutional impact after training is over. And even though it's counterintuitive, we actually began the whole discussion before the training began, not after the training is over. So we learned today some areas, and you've sent in some good comments about what was useful. Now, where do we go from here? We've had these 4 attempts to look at best practices, mentoring, gender, M&E. What are your ideas of what would be most useful in the future for us to address, either through a community of practice or possibly just individual discussions among all of us, but it would be nice to have a way we could meet and continue this process. Maybe some more webinars. USAID has been very supportive. They funded this pilot, really. Wouldn't you say, Anne-Claire, it's a pilot? It's been a pilot, and it's worked from the reactions we've gotten from everybody very well. So how should we continue? What are the topics you want to see us address in some form in the future? And please send them in writing so we can see them pop in on the screen. And we won't go into any particular depth of any of these right now, but tell us what you think. We've actually come up with a few, but we want to hear from you first.
Now, it would be great to get those in writing, but we could also see 2 hands are up,
Well, we just lost Anne-Claire. She's sitting right next to me. How's that for technology? I'll just repeat what she said. She said a couple people have their hands up. So we're going to ask, we're going to unmute a few people while you send in your written comments, which we, of course, will share with all of you. Let's see, who's got their hand up? Tag, they both already spoke. Tag and Florence. Okay. Florence, you're on just for a very brief comment, if you would. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear?
Okay.
Great, there you are. Speak up.
I couldn't use the written part, so I had to raise my hand. I think I wanted to end by just going back to certainly what I'm going to use is your commitment chart that you had at the very beginning, and remembering that commitment begins with awareness and understanding and then engagement. And I think that's a very powerful model that you started with.
Great, excellent point. Commitment begins with engagement at the beginning, where you can lay these ideas down and set the stage for a lot of other things to happen. Great, thanks, Florence. Tag, can we unmute Tag for a minute? Tag, you already spoke too, but we're giving. Are you there?
Okay, you're unmuted now, Tag.
That's an unintentional hand raising. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay. I never took your hand down after you spoke. Okay, I'll mute you again. But Dave Hansen, your hand has gone up, so I'm unmuting you now.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes,
Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on Tag's point about the CRISPs. You know, I think one of the beauties of the CRISP program is that beyond the training, students remain engaged in networks of science and research, and I think that these networks not only provide a venue and opportunity for these trained scientists to continue their professional growth through research itself, but I think also, you know, they provide an opportunity to provide very important support to what they're doing. And a question I would ask here is, what things can be done? I mean, the CRISP model is one model, but what are the ways that we might identify to help sustain these relationships that are developed during the training process? You know, how to build these networks for well, continued moral and professional support as well as professional growth. And I'm sure that there must be a number of them out there, but I think that a review of them might be very useful.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about the latter point. I would say, though, that from my own experience, I was in a fellowship program for 2 years, and it was the kind of program where we were brought together for 1 week. That was our interaction, and then we were sent to different places all across the world for a year, and so we spent all that time apart. And at some stage, several months in, the program decided that we really ought to be talking to each other more often. And so they said, we're launching this mechanism for you all to talk to each other. And still, there was no communication because we didn't know each other all that well. We were all very busy. We were all engaged in different projects. But the program then decided that they would drive the conversation. And so they did so by choosing, putting out questions, strongly encouraging, or you could even say requiring us to respond. And by doing so, then a dialogue started that we were interested in continuing. And so I definitely think that with all these mechanisms that get set up, we should not assume that just because the platform exists that then people are going to start talking to each other. And I think this webinar series and our AgriLink site is an exact example of that. Even though we keep hearing from people, there is a need for a community of practice and for people to share ideas with them. Unless there is a driver that's pushing things along and reaching out to people, we're all so busy and pulled in different directions that it really does require a little bit of central guidance. And then conversations organically evolve from there, and there's lots of flow beyond what was originally intended that comes out of that, but you definitely need that drive coming from somewhere.
Thanks, Anne-Claire. I was just going to mention, and thanks Dave Hansen for mentioning that when you're lucky enough to have a long-term project, networking is obviously much more doable. If you have no long-term engagement with the trainee, that's where we need to work on finding low-cost or no-cost methods of doing that. So we welcome all of your suggestions. A lot of things have been sent in which we're anxious to share with you. I thought we would just put the next slide on. We want to wrap this up very quickly. But the next slide has some of our ideas, well, that we've picked up from other people as well. Let's see, unmute Dave. So professional networking, for example, that was a very good, we've been talking about professional networking. In fact, Dave Hansen, who we were just unmuting right now. Sorry, Dave.
Or muting.
Or muted, yes. That was what his discussion was about. And training and mentor recruitment, which is another area that's come up. How do you actually structure a mentoring and training program, a mentor? What do you do to recruit? In fact, some of the things that came up today talked about holistic process of recruiting and selection of people that were actually, that you had a profile that you were looking for. Building a dynamic alumni network, wow, lots of subtopics there. How do you do it when there's no funding? What can you do? What can the students do when they return? Service learning opportunities, interesting. Internships maybe during the training, and then they go back and they organize other internships in their home country. These are just brainstorming ideas that we've kicked around. Private sector engagement, many opportunities, not sure exactly what that would mean, but lots of opportunities there. And the use of e-learning, we have not even gone into the richness, rich possibilities available for distance learning and learning using technology.
Helga also added leadership training that she would like to hear more about how you do that effectively. So this list is, we put this up here, one, to stimulate your thinking on what would be useful to all of you. But I'm going to use this now as a segue to wrapping up this entire webinar series and this webinar today. What happens next for us is that we are going to be pulling together, we've already pulled together summaries of each of the individual webinars we've had. And then we are also going to be pulling together a larger document that identifies best practices in all of these areas. So we welcome further thinking on this after this webinar ends today. If you think of other topics that you're really interested in learning more about, please send them to us. And if you have any fabulous resources that you can share with us on any of these topics, tools that you've used or strategies or ideas you have, please send them to us so that we can integrate them in this final, well, not final, but a best practices report that we will pull together that we hope will be the beginning of conversations and continued conversations on this, not the last, certainly not the last word. So,
well, I just want to say thank you to everybody for your the time. Everyone's very busy, and the time spent listening and contributing is very appreciated. Some great ideas. It's kind of like for us a beginning of a process of understanding better how we can improve training to have a long-term impact on institutions. I think that's our ultimate vision, and we know it would have a huge effect in developing countries where institutions very, very much need performance improvement and kind of a dynamic environment where these trained students can return to. So I think that's where I'll end my comments.
Okay.
I really enjoyed doing this. I've learned a lot, and I look forward to other opportunities.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Andy, for all the contributions that you've made to the webinar series. I think that your focus on institutional strengthening made that conversation so much sharper and in focus. So I appreciate that lens that you brought to this discussion. And I also want to thank Clara Cohen at USAID, who brainstormed with us and came up with this idea many months ago, working with several of us here at APLU. And I think Clara really understood the need that this activity was intended to fill before many of us did, and we appreciate her insights and all the feedback she's given us along the way. I also want to thank Susan Fickling from IIE, who helped us, who presented on the second webinar with Andy, and Marco Nordalos from Award, who also presented on the third webinar on mentoring with Marian Jenga, who was an Award Fellow. And I'll close by thanking again all of you for all the contributions. We hope this is the beginning rather than the end of communication on all of these things. We will keep the AgriLink site open, and we'll be keeping our minds open to exploring how we can continue to support what we hope might eventually become a community of practice on institutional strengthening. And Andy, I think it's going to make one final comment.
I would just want to, you never want to do these things without thanking the people that make it all work. So I want to thank Mark Warner, who's in another room answering your needs for all of the technical part, and he's really helped us with this a lot.
And most importantly, for making all of this work was Paula Villegas, who did not know, none of us knew how to run a webinar before we started, and she figured it out very quickly and guided us through a number of technical difficulties, and we really appreciate all the support you've given to this. Thank you, Paula. So with that, thank you, everybody. We will end this now. We'll be sending out a summary and the link to the webinars. We apologize for the technical difficulties we had today, but I hope that the majority of the good ideas were heard, and you'll see them all in the summary. Thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.